Hello and welcome to this live broadcast coming to you from our ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe's capital. Transparency and accountability fighting corruption. This program is brought to you by Zimpaper's television network, ZTN, and our partner, the Transparency International Zimbabwe. Today, our discussion focuses on the risk of corruption in the management and distribution of social protection initiatives and also humanitarian aid in Zimbabwe during disaster response. Now, corruption's drain on public resources always harms government's ability to provide adequate health care, education and other basic rights, especially in times of disaster. Now, I'm joined in studio by Alois Nyamazana, who is a monitoring and evaluation officer at Transparency International Zimbabwe. Alois, welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon, viewers. Good afternoon, Blessing.
Now, also during the course of the program, we should be joined via telephone by Honorable Temba Mliswa, the Member of Parliament for Norton constituency. We also have Jefta Tsamwi, an advocacy officer at World Vision Zimbabwe, and we will also be talking to Dr. E.H. Mugwadi, who is the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. Now, Alois, the 10th edition of Global Corruption Barometer released by Transparency International points to high levels of corruption. More than half of all citizens surveyed in 35 African countries think corruption is getting worse in their respective countries. Can you tell us about the TIZ's role in ensuring transparency and accountability, especially in the wake of social protection initiatives and also human aid?
Thank you so much. As Transparency International, we are part of the global coalition of organizations that are fighting corruption. And our role really is to fight corruption in all its forms. What we do mostly is through citizen empowerment. We empower citizens to report corruption through educating them and also providing them with information regarding how they can resist, reject, and report corruption. We also try as much as possible to ensure that we empower our citizens with legal information regarding where and how they should report. So basically, we are facilitating reporting of corruption cases, those victims and witnesses of corruption. So many times, people might not be able to report cases of corruption because they don't know the legal implications of whatever they are going to do. So we have what we call an ALAC unit that is responsible for providing legal assistance, legal aid to victims and witnesses of corruption. The other very important function that we do is conducting some researches to come up with factual information on the ground regarding how corruption is happening and even the forms in which it is happening, and also the citizens' perceptions and views regarding corruption. So basically, that's what we are doing as Transparency International. And recently, we conducted a research in Chimanimani to ascertain or to establish some corruption risks within the management and distribution of humanitarian aid. So we did a case study of the cyclone Idai in Chimanimani and also in Budiro and Glenville, where we're also looking at the cholera epidemic that occurred around 2017. So basically, that's what we do as Transparency International Zimbabwe.
Now, if I'm getting you correct there, I'll get into the research that you mentioned just now. But before I do that, I just want you to possibly highlight more. Is the Transparency International Zimbabwe just there for advocacy? Their mandate, how far can they go in ensuring that the red flags that they've raised have actually given some results?
We use quite a number of approaches to fight corruption. And the other thing that we do is to engage policymakers, government. For example, we do researches, for example, to ascertain how corruption is happening on the ground. So we take those results and we engage the government and other policymakers. We highlight to them some of the issues that are coming from the ground and the recommendations that we think should be taken in order to fight this corruption. So our role is not just to maybe educate the communities, but also to influence the policy, the broader policy level at national level. So engage with government, we engage with independent commission, independent commissions. We also engage with other civil societies, evidence-based policy making.
Evidence-based policy making is obviously very important. As you were talking there about the issue of grassroots, in corruption. How is the issue of trust at grassroots level?
Basically, in governments and their citizens is that there's that lack of trust, lack of transparency. And the most important thing, or the main challenge, is that maybe there's lack of access to information. The barometer, they're actually mirroring what is happening at community level. Because even if you throw a stone and you randomly pick a person, ask them whether they or not they trust the government, they will say, no, we don't trust them because they believe government and policymakers, they are looting their resources that they are supposed to benefit from.
We'll get into the findings of the research that you did conduct in Chimanimani and also in Budiro, just like you highlight. I'm being advised that we do have Honorable Temba Mliswa on the line, who is ready for us. Honorable Mliswa, who is the Member of Parliament for Norton constituency. Honorable Mliswa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Now, being on the ground, what are the corruption risks and malpractice that is experienced, especially in humanitarian aid?
You've got to understand that at a time like this, you need to put safety nets which ensure that there is accountability and there's transparency in what we do. And I think the government is not new to these disasters. First of all, the cyclone Idai is a good one where lessons must be learned on how we are able to then mobilize resources, how we are able to account for them, how we are able to get them to the people. And the tendency is that there's mobilization going on at the top, at national level. But does that cascade to province? Does it cascade to district? Does it cascade to constituency? Does it cascade to the ward level where the people are ultimately? And the question is, would it not be better to go directly to the ward where the people are, to try and ensure that you don't waste time in the process? And I've not seen much coming through. I've seen a lot of contributions going to the National Task Force, and I've not equally had the National Task Force reporting on the good that they've received, where they've gone to. And that does not at all augur well with well-wishers, because they're watching to see where the goods are going. For example, in Norton, through the companies that they are, the Chinese companies, Sany Yangfeng, GDI, Zimplatz, Schweppes, through BSP, have been able to donate. And the moment that they donate, we disperse things to the people with their teams involved. Ubit Angel Foundation donated some millimoil. And we do that. Raha, the cooking oil company, did that. So people want to see things going to the people immediately. So our policy is very clear. Whatever we get, it goes directly to the people. If the PPEs, it goes directly to the institutions which are in charge of health in the rural and in the urban. So being on the ground, it requires us to have resources which we are supposed to have. Right now, that's the reason why we are having a situation where everybody is now starting to mobilize, because they're not getting anything from the National Task Force, which is meant for them on the ground.
Now, are there policy gaps in Zimbabwe's anti-corruption drive? Because obviously you're mentioning that we could be doing things better. Are there any gaps that are imminent, and how can we close these gaps?
Yeah, I think it's about, first of all, I would have liked the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Health to at least do their role of oversight in terms of COVID-19, the effect of it, what needs to be done. And of course, government knows that they are watching. The Public Accounts Committee, again, which is responsible for the resources, which are given to government through taxpayers' money, accounting as well. So with social distancing and so forth, be it Zoom and all that. That was supposed to happen because that does not stop that aspect, because the fear is that when the cat is away, the mice will play. See, and here the cat is Parliament for its role on oversight, and the mice is the government.
Now,
so you also, sorry, yes.
You mentioned the parliamentary oversight. I was going to come to that. Is Parliament doing its role to ensure its mandate? Because it has to represent the people.
Totally. You know, we do three things. One, oversight. Two, representation. Three, legislation, making the laws. But representation is really up to the individuals elected. It's supposed to be effective representation. Though the question the electorate has is, did we elect an effective legislator or not? Are you with me? I cannot speak on other constituencies. I would like to speak on my role in Norton, in that I am doing my part, and I'm glad that the Honourable Speaker of the House of Assembly has actually sent me a message to say you are doing well for your people. So we are expected to do that. But how effective others are, it's a different thing altogether. So we are that's the reason why the government, no matter how big the national task force is, whoever is in it, they still report to Parliament. That is the reason why you saw me standing my ground when the Honourable Minister Mtangwa, who's the leader of the task force in Marsh West, wanted me to sit down. I said, no, but I'm here representing the people as a parliamentarian. I'd like to know the role. I'd like to know the resources that are there. I'd like to know what you've done to ensure that the frontline staffers are protected. So I'm doing my part, and we can do our part. We don't have to be in Parliament, you see. And wherever government is and we are there, we must put to task the government whether they're doing the right thing or not. And that makes us come up with better decisions and also come up with better strategy to be able to confront the enemy of COVID-19. It's no way a match, no. No one is bigger in this. All of us have a role to play, and let's all play our role effectively. The National Task Force is a welcome move. It's critical that it is there, but it can only be better if it's also told that here it's not important, here it's not important. For example, the mobilization should be in the test kits more than some of the things we are getting. Because, yes, we can get ventilators now. Are we going to use those ventilators? How do you use a ventilator when you have not had a testing kit to test somebody? So my priority would be National Task Force, why don't we mobilize more test kits in the country? We test the frontline staffers with an understanding. Those legislators working too, they're already at risk, councillors and so forth. And then we have an indicator, because I would say the barometer of this disease is dependent on the statistics of the frontline staffers.
I think now that you mentioned that, we did hear that government is deliberately going to be targeting the frontline staff. But I just want to bring you back to the point of the legislation. As a legislator, we do have the Civil Protection Act. It was crafted in 1989. Do you think that it is still relevant to what is happening in terms of the international benchmarks?
No. It's not, certainly not. It's the CPU certainly needs to be relooked at, and this is where we need to come in from a legislative point of view to ensure that it is up there with the global trends. But remember, we expect ministers to bring this to Parliament. Any bill is brought through to Parliament by the minister, unless sponsored. So the question is, what are the ministers doing to ensure that whatever acts and bills are there conform with the modern trends of what is happening in their sector? It is, and then it goes to Cabinet. This is important for people to understand, because they might think that Parliament, all it does is sit. But if we're not given any bills coming from ministers, who will sit? It is them. So the question is, who is sleeping on duty? Is it Parliament or it is the Cabinet ministers who are supposed to bring this to Parliament? And they are guided by the Attorney General's office from a legal point of view. So yes, there are many acts which are archaic, okay, and which needs to be looked at. But the onus is on that minister to be able to do that. In Honorable Ziambi, the Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, as well leader of government, he's done well. And Parliament has actually done well in ensuring that any bill which comes to Parliament is disposed of as soon as possible, because we know what it means to the people, how important it is for the people.
Political will is obviously essential, related to what you just highlighted now. Given the path that is being taken by Zimbabwe's administration, are we on track to reduce corruption, especially if future disasters occur, especially for humanitarian aid?
You know, we all know the president has spoken about corruption for a number of times. The president has gone as far as appointing people in his office, Tabani Mpofu, who's the director in his office, to look into corruption issues. There's also an anti-corruption commission, which is chaired by the Iron Lady, Justice Matanda Moyo. We've got the police, who are also responsible for enforcement of the law. We've got the courts, the judiciary as well. So you have a situation where it cannot be a one-pronged approach. Each institution must complement the other. And you complement the other by playing your part. You've also got the Prosecutor General's office. And we have it on record that the Prosecutor General, in his wisdom and in his eagerness to do work and trying to make sure things are done, did say that institutions had been captured. And I remember I asked this in Parliament to the Honorable Vice President Temba Mliswa to say, what are we doing to address what the Prosecutor General has said? And not much has come out of that. It is important and prudent and good for the country to then say to him, okay, where have we gone wrong? What do you think is happening, and so forth? Because there's got to be confidence, okay, within the nation that we are dealing with corruption. And there are many cases which have come before the court of high-profile people, which are not going anywhere, and nothing is happening to them. Now, you know, sanctions are okay. Corruption is worse than sanctions, because this is your own resources which you control, which we cannot account for, which is supposed to ensure that the country's fiscus, you know, is well resourced to be able to distribute, to disburse funds to the various ministries, because you must look at it as a bank where you're depositing money. And as and when you need money, you must draw from that. But if the bank has no money, how do you draw from the bank? And this is the situation that we're in. The political will from His Excellency is there. The political will from other players, I don't see it, because it has to be a concerted effort. Now we have a situation where, because people are underperforming and people are incompetent at the end of the day, you have no choice but as the driver to end up collecting the money as if you're a conductor, because the conductor is not doing his job. So each time you stop the bus,
Just before I let you go, Honorable Mliswa, issues of times of disaster, really, are they an opportunity to pass accountability? Do times of disaster leave us at the risk of more corruption? Very quickly, as we close.
Certainly, because the money that comes from Treasury is for emergencies, and you've got the sharks who are ready. You know, you've got this whole PPE happening. You don't know what is happening, and so forth. You have companies donating. They just donate. They don't donate for a thing, nothing. They also need to get something out of it. Are you with me? Unless you're not in the health sector, you certainly. But we've got to appreciate that it's also a recipe for more corruption to happen. And unfortunately, we are doing nothing to ensure that we vet the people coming forward. We are transparent in reporting who the money that has been allocated for PPEs. So much money has bought this, and this has gone to A, B, C, D. So we now demand that the government must be able to account for every penny which has come from the Treasury, where it has gone to. And the same way the Minister of Health is giving a statement, an update on the cases of COVID-19. Why doesn't the Minister of Finance too give an update on what we have received, where it has gone, and how much money
the actual disbursements? Honorable Mliswa, I have to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for those insights, those points that you did highlight.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Honourable Temba Mliswa, the Member of Parliament for Norton Constituency, Alus, raising some key pertinent questions. The structure of institutions, is talking about decentralization. I think we're going to raise this up when we talk to the Human Rights Commission as well, to find out how institutions are they getting into the grassroots to be effective. He talked about effective representation. He also talked about the legislative framework. And on paper, it seems that we've got a very good piece of legislation as a basis for us to start. But when it comes to the action, there seems to be less action.
Yeah, that's very true. That's the challenge that we have as a nation. I always say we have one of the best constitutions in the world. We do have a very strong legal framework, but the challenge is on execution. We are not implementing what we have on paper, and that leaves us very vulnerable to corruption as a nation. So I think Parliament and the government and other policymakers should ensure that the legal framework and the constitutional provisions are implemented for us to fight corruption. So really, that's a very big gap, and we feel from a civil society point of view, issues around political are very key, because if we have the laws, we have a constitution that is very strong, why are people not being prosecuted? Why are people not being sentenced? Why are they not being convicted? All those issues. So issues around political will remain very central to the issues around...
Did you pick up any of these issues as you did your research?
Yes, when we did our research in Shimani-Mani, we did pick up those issues. One of the key corruption risks that we identified is to do with politicization of aid. And the people that politicize aid are normally those that are also politically exposed, those that are linked to politically powerful people. So what we saw is that, and the allegations when we are doing our research is that instead of people benefiting from the aid, or the people instead of benefiting equally, the aid ended up being politicized. Those that were regarded as being politically incorrect were then sidelined. But there was also this beneficiaries that were affected by the cyclone Idai, even the cholera epidemic. So politicization of aid is very rampant, because those guys that politicize aid at grassroots level, they know that they have protection from the high offices or the powers that be. So I think it's a very serious issue that we have.
Have we shared these findings with the powers that be, and is there any action that is coming out?
Yes, we have done quite a number of, because we finalized our research just before the outbreak of the COVID-19. But we have put our report online, and we have done some radio programs. But immediately after the COVID-19, we are going to do some policy dialogues where we engage Parliament, government, and other policymakers to discuss the findings of this report. And during the research, even the other institutions like government, even other CSOs, Parliament, they also did participate in terms of validation, in terms of even the research itself. So we have been working with our policymakers, with our government, with our Parliament, in terms of even during the research process itself. So we normally make sure that we submit the recommendations or the findings to the powers that be, so that they also understand and get to know what's happening at the grassroots.
Okay, we'll keep on looking at more of those findings and other areas as we are in studio, but I am joined right now on the line by Dr. Elasto Mugwadi. Dr. E.H. Mugwadi is the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. Dr. Mugwadi, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Now, kindly, can you break down the link between human rights and corruption during disasters?
Well, yes, there is a serious link between corruption and human rights. In fact, to quote the former UN Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, she said corruption is actually an enormous obstacle to the realization of all human rights. And these include civil, political, socio-economic and cultural rights, as well as the right to development. Yes, corruption, as you well know, violates the core human rights principles of transparency, accountability, non-discrimination, and meaningful participation in every aspect of the life of the community. But conversely, as again, Pillay noted, these last three principles, when upheld and implemented, are the most effective, in fighting corruption. The most vulnerable groups would obviously be at the receiving end of any corrupt activity. before we even talk about, the COVID-19, disaster, I would need to refer, to the report, I think that was made by the former now late president, that about 15 billion of diamonds, worth of diamonds was looted from this country, around 2015. If, that was correct, it did a serious dent on the enjoyment of human rights, because that money could have been used for infrastructure development, for, uplifting the standards of our hospitals, and other infrastructure that we consider to be critical for enjoyment of human rights in general. So what we are saying inherently is that corruption affects human rights, directly or indirectly, if you want to say, because, it involves the deprivation of property. In other words, people's entitlements or rights to their property, or even legitimate expectation of people to the benefits accruing from the country's natural resources, especially the diamond issue, which I referred to. So generally, people are affected variously in their rights. The right to participate in one's government is also compromised when money is exchanged in return for votes or elections, and predetermined by patronage. But there's the issue of the right to adequate standard of living. I would want to commend government for coming up in March. I think a report was made by the Herald on the 31st of March, which said that government was setting aside $600 million for vulnerable members of our society. And these are, people who include the children, the elderly, the unemployed, women, persons living with disabilities, amongst others. And the finance minister himself, Professor Mthuli Ncube, also followed up by saying vulnerable groups in our society are the most exposed under this COVID-19 crisis. And accordingly, Treasury is setting aside resources to cover 1 million vulnerable households. And the Treasury was going to be availing 200 million per month under, a cash transfer program.
What is the Commission doing to reduce the impact of, human rights issues?
Well, no, I mean, we in our mandate, we have the responsibility of monitoring situations like what we are currently doing, and we also investigate, any complaints that we receive by people who, feel shortchanged. And once we do our investigations, we compile our reports and recommendations, and file them with the duty bearers, who in the majority of cases would be government. We are currently, as I said, monitoring, the situation under the government program, where you and I are supposed to be staying at home. So this lockdown has had, serious impacts on people's rights. But we are visiting every other place possible to ensure that in respect of access to basic commodities that are necessary to sustain health, to sustain life.
Livelihoods.
Yeah, the livelihood. That is being accessed by each and everyone who is a Zimbabwean or a resident of this country.
You raise issues of reports that come through. Can you tell us more about the ways that people can actually highlight human rights issues? And also, are there any actionables that are coming out of the reports that have been made so far?
Oh, yeah, yes. I can confidently say when we started investigating complaints that we were receiving, especially on partisan distribution of inputs and food aid, due, of course, to corruption, we made various reports which can actually be accessed on our website, www.zhrc.org.zw. The reports which, involved the issue of discriminate distribution of food aid, we widely discussed, even in Parliament. And we are happy to say remedial measures were taken, especially when government said they were going to limit the involvement of, politicians in these programs. Politicians in the sense that in the majority of cases, they are aligned to certain groups, partisan groups, those who support them. And this tends to, exclude many people who would have, an entitlement. And what is being done in these schemes by government is to ensure the schemes are handled by professionals and in a professional manner. These are some of the issues we, time and again have to monitor, but to encourage people who feel, shortchanged, as I said earlier on, to file reports with the Commission.
Hopefully the Commission is also resourced in terms of actually going on the ground to assess on itself. How is the structure of decentralization when it comes to the Commission itself?
Well, as far as decentralization is concerned, it's a worrisome issue to us. As you may be aware, we only have two offices, one here in Harare and the other one in Bulawayo. But the ideal situation is for us to have an office in every province, which would enable us to access the grassroots.
Is that something that's in the pipeline?
Well, it's something that is in the pipeline and is recurring, year in, year out in our budgets. Except the allocations that we are getting are not sufficient to allow us to open other offices in various other provinces. But we are hoping, with the assistance of our development donor partners as well, as government, we should be doing this. As government is now talking about devolution, I am sure we will be considered to be one of the relevant institutions that is required to devolve and have issues handled at provincial, if not even district level.
Now, Alois here in studio was just highlighting that we've got a very strong legislative framework, a constitution that even provides for more than 30 rights and freedoms. From a human rights gap perception, is it what is the legislation like in terms of human rights gaps within the constitution? Where can we improve?
Well, I think what is required really is to ensure enabling, legislative enactments are aligned to the constitution. I mean, if you look at the Bill of Rights, it's a robust one. The previous, Bill of Rights excluded the socio-economic, cultural rights which have been included or which were included in the current, constitution. So it's really a question of implementation, of those principles, which is required. Yeah, but otherwise, I would say, as far as the supreme law of the land is concerned, the constitution, all rights issues are properly, ventilated in that document. Yeah.
Dr. Mugwadi, I have to thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for giving us those insightful points.
No, you're most welcome.
Dr. Mugwadi, the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. Alois, the issue of decentralization, we only have two offices. It's bringing to the core the multi-stakeholder approach that I'm seeing, that this effort cannot be the Transparency International Zimbabwe effort alone. From your own assessment, as you were doing your research, the issue of a fragmented effort in as far as fighting corruption is concerned, hasn't that hampered the effort itself?
That's a very good question. We do have challenges because of lack of coordination in terms of the way we fight corruption as a nation. But I'm happy that the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission is now developing the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which should then address those issues. But in terms of maybe zeroing in on issues around humanitarian aid, I think the challenge that we do have is lack of coordination within the broader context of humanitarian management. For example, if you look at what was happening during the Cyclone Idai crisis and even the cholera epidemic in Cleveland, you know, people are very generous. People love other people. So normally, you know, during crisis, they donate. We have seen individuals donating. We saw organizations donating. We saw companies donating. A lot of other, you know, even UN agencies, even other countries, they donated to the Cyclone Idai. But the challenge now is, for example, there were some drop-in centers where people were supposed to drop their goods for help. But the challenge now is how do we ensure that those goods are getting to the supposed beneficiary?
In time.
Exactly. Let's look at the church, for example. Pastors are collecting goods from the people. People are giving goods to the pastors and all those things. But how are we going to make sure that the goods are going to the supposed beneficiary? Is the person in Chimani benefiting from that aid? We have seen quite a number of even other organizations. So that is caused by lack of a coordinated framework. Because it appears like sometimes aid is regarded as something that should not be accounted for because it's aid. But at the end of the day, those guys that are in Chimaniman, they're supposed to enjoy their rights. If you look at it right now, some of them do not have access to water, access to housing, access to quite a number of things. Even infrastructure is still very bad. So the issue of the lack of coordination is a very big challenge because we don't have a national policy framework in terms of how do we ensure accountability, whether it's church, whether it's companies, whether it's individuals donating towards a cause during humanitarian crisis. There's lack of that coordinated framework. It's a very fragmented approach. So the recommendation that we have from the research is that we need to have a consolidated framework where we know how, if it's a church, I would say a company, how do you ensure that there's transparency and accountability in management and distribution of humanitarian aid?
A call to action there by Alois, definitely a coordinated effort in trying to ensure that the beneficiaries do get the value from the donations that are actually coming through. We are joined right now by Jefta Tamwi, who is an advocacy officer at World Vision. Jefta, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you. And how are you?
Fine, thanks. Alois was just raising the issue of coordination in Cyclone Idai, an area that they did intensive research. Now, I know the World Vision is involved with a lot of humanitarian aid. What was your role in the Cyclone Idai response?
Okay, thank you for bringing that. I think it's important that we also talk about Cyclone Idai because it's one of the recent disasters that we had. And I think regarding the issues that we're talking about today, critical questions that we need to be asking include what did we learn from Cyclone Idai, which we're implementing as we are responding to COVID-19. And if you see the trend, these disasters, the pandemics, they keep on coming. And it seems Zimbabwe is also becoming more and more vulnerable, which brings us to the question of how prepared are we as a country. But you asked about our role in the Cyclone Idai response. Yeah, World Vision was one of the organizations that was responding to the disaster. And us, in terms of our operation, we're guided by our commandant as a responsive humanitarian organization. Of course, providing humanitarian assistance and, of course, development work in the area. I need also to mention that whilst we were there responding to Cyclone Idai, World Vision was already having programs that we're running in Chimanman. So I think it was one of the, advantages that we had in terms of just scaling up our programs and responding to the emergent needs that had arisen. So in Chimanmani, we're also there, to close in the gaps that are often, ignored or forgotten when a disaster strikes. When Cyclone Idai happened, many people, what they will talk about is about going there to save lives and distributing food, clothes. Those are very important. but that's only for the first and initial stages of the disaster. When you're, providing the emergencies, the life-saving, goods and services that are needed to save the lives of people.
There needs to be more long-term.
Exactly. It goes beyond that. So as World Vision, that's where now we're coming. Of course, we also contributed to the life-saving, programs that we're running on. But we also was there to provide some of the, the needed necessities for the people. Where children that are going to school, we need to make sure that education has to continue. There are child protection issues that arise when a disaster strikes, and things like that. So those are kind of interventions that we're doing. And then, of course, now as we are moving into the recovery stage, if you look at an area like Chimanimani, those people are used to self-sustain themselves. It's one of the agricultural hub of the country. How do we restore their irrigation, schemes that they were using to feed their families, restoring their livelihoods, and at the same time preparing the communities to respond to disasters when they happen in the future. And this is where we are right now.
Preparing for disasters when they happen in the future. Just as you said that, I thought about awareness, the importance of information access and awareness. How was the challenge in terms of getting to grassroots, the information that was needed at the time?
Yeah, I think this is also now related to the particular issues that we're talking about, issues of governance and corruption and all. Because when we talk about providing information to the people to be able to respond to a disaster, we're also talking about how prepared are the communities and how prepared is the government to provide the needed assistance. What
are the key governance issues that you encountered then?
I think for us, I would say we were not affected much, maybe to the level that other organizations could have been affected, mainly because of the strategic advantage that I talked about, that World Vision was already operating in the area. So I know there were concerns that were raised of allegations of aid being taken by government officials and things like that, but I cannot confirm to that because we're the different approaches, World Vision, of how we're doing it. We're already operating in the area, and we still use our same strategy of taking the aid that we have and taking it directly to the people. And of course, using our own structures that we created and just scaling up from what we're already doing. So that's the advantage that we had, and I wouldn't say we had serious governance issues. But what I can mention is, again, on the issue of preparedness. Even us as World Vision, we also had our own shortcomings. We had other, capacities that we didn't have. For instance, I talked earlier on about child protection in emergencies. You find that local capacity within the country as a whole, we fall short on that. And this is the issue that we then bring on board to say, what are the lessons that we got from Cyclone Idai, which we need to bring in as we are responding to COVID-19, and of course preparing ourselves for future disasters that may befall our country.
What are some of these lessons, if you can highlight?
Firstly, I'll go back to the issue of us preparing. You remember the incidents that were happening when Cyclone Idai happened. And we had no opportunity, we had no way of taking even the emergency relief that we needed to take to Chimanimani, and everyone else was stuck. Of course, we have a department in the government that is supposed to be dealing with with those issues. How equipped are they to be providing such kind of critical emergency relief in times of need? And then there's also the issue of coordination. When an emergency happens, everyone, of course, wants to go there with the piece of meal that they can have. But in the process, we miss out on a lot of things, including the loopholes that then comes in terms of the governance, the corruption issues that we're talking about, because there is no coordinated approach of who is doing what, who's taking what, and to who. So those are the kind of systems that need to be in place for effective responding to a response. And I also need to mention that we need to be investing more in the local capacities as well. Because the issues that we're talking about, the governance and the corruption, if we strengthen community systems, they can be one of the key strategic areas that will have, in terms of building, solid structures that can, prevent any acts of corruption to be happening in situations of emergencies.
Jefta, I have to cut you off there. We seem to be running out of time, but thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you so much.
Jefta Tsamwi, who is the advocacy officer at World Vision. Just as we are about to head out, Alois, he did highlight many key issues there. Preparedness and response. As a country, are we more prepared than we are responsive? And also transparency and accountability in public procurement, very quickly as we head to a close.
Yeah, maybe I would want to talk about preparedness in terms of issues around governance and fighting corruption. I think currently we are being reactive. We are not proactive. We need to be proactive as a nation in terms of ensuring that during times of disasters, there are clear and transparent governance systems. The challenge that happens, I think he highlighted the guy from World Vision, that we have challenges in terms of maybe starting to act when the disaster happened. But we know that our country has been infested with the disasters for quite a long time. Why can't we prepare for a coordination framework before the disasters happen? So from a governance point of view, we need to come up with a policy that ensures that there's coordination, a coordinated framework, to fight corruption, to improve transparency. And on the issues that you have just highlighted, issues around procurement. The other thing that we found during our research is the hidden procurement systems, what I can say, secretive procurement system, where there's lack of access to information in terms of our procurement systems as people are buying goods for disasters. One, there's the issue of beneficial ownership. Who are the owners of the companies that are supplying goods and services to the victims of of whatever the disaster, cyclone Idai or cholera or whatever, even the coronavirus?
Do you see us improving in that area in the near future? Yes, we've taken a very good step in the right direction. Like, for example, we now have a law. If you look at the Section 72 of the Companies and Other Business Entities Act, it talks about the issue about beneficial ownership, where there's supposed to be transparency in terms of who owns what, in terms of the companies that supplies the goods and services for even for the other government processes. But the challenge that we have, like what we've been highlighting, is the lack of implementation. We are supposed to have a beneficial ownership register where people should be able to see who is behind this company, so that we avoid dealing with the politically exposed people. Because the challenge that now happens is inflating prices, so that people can benefit at the expense of the people that are suffering. So I think that's the challenge that we need to improve on procurement processes, transparency, beneficial ownership transparency. Everyone should know who are the owners of the companies, how are they benefiting, where are they getting the service, who is paying them, and how much are they being paid. All those issues to be very clear so that we improve our transparency. We obviously need to also strike a balance between the measures that we are taking in reducing the corruption, and also without compromising on flexibility of the job at hand.
Precisely.
Alois, I have to thank you so much for your contributions. Alois, you were with me in studio today. Transparency and accountability, fighting corruption. This was the program as we come to the end of the show. I would like to thank Alois once again, who was in studio with me from Transparency International Zimbabwe. He is a monitoring and evaluation officer, and as well as those guests that did join us via telephone, Honorable Temba Mliswa, the legislator for Norton constituency, Jefta Tsamwi, an advocacy officer at World Vision Zimbabwe, and we talked to Dr. E.H. Mugwadi, the chairperson of Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission. Today we were focusing on the risk of corruption in the management and distribution of social protection initiatives and humanitarian aid in Zimbabwe during disaster response. Many thanks to our partner Transparency International Zimbabwe and all our viewers who followed this discussion through our platforms. Keep in touch with more ZTN programming via our social media platforms. That's on Facebook, Zim Papers TV Network, on Twitter at ZTN News, and also our website ztn.co.zw. My name is Blessing Munatsi. It has been an absolute pleasure. Do stay safe.